moderator, FTA's Bus Safety Program Manager, and we'll hear presentations by Erik, Larson, and Ream, Lazaro from Boyd, Caton, and Grant Transportation Group, Inc. And at this point, I will turn the presentation over to Joe.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Neil. I appreciate that. First of all, I want to welcome everybody and thank everyone for your time to participate on this. When we first started talking about doing this webinar, and we've been talking about it for a long time, we were bouncing around the idea of being able to have a presentation. We normally do these presentations to classrooms where you have to travel or back to come. And we thought, man, we could probably get 30, 40 people on a webinar. Wouldn't that be great? Last I checked, I think we're up over 70 people in this webinar right now. So this is really fantastic. This is a huge group, and this really goes to show what we can do with modern technology. So maybe next time we do this, we'll get over 100. I don't want to take up too much time. I want to save most of the time we have for Erik and Ream to actually tell you what they are going to tell you, because I think the information they've got is really valuable. I do want to give you a little bit of background just so you have an idea of the lay of the land. The FTA has had a regulatory rail safety program since the 1990s, where although really it's up to the state to have a safety program for the rail transit systems in their state, but it's still an FTA required program. So in 2012, Congress passed MAP 21, and they said to the FTA, you're going to need to have a public transit safety program for all modes of transit, and that includes rail and bus and ferry boats on non-navigable waterways. So I'm not worried about non-navigable waterways right now. I'm not worried about rail transit right now, but the FTA, Office of Safety and Oversight, where I work, is working to create this safety program that's going to work for all modes of transit. So in the past, we had the required rail transit safety program called the SSO program, and Erik's going to tell you about the bus program that was born in the 1980s or 90s, and what did I say, the 80s? It was born in the 1990s or early 2000s, and that was a voluntary program. So now we're sort of creating this one grand unified program, which will have voluntary and less than voluntary components to it. Everybody's probably going to want to know about that, right? When does this come required? And there will be different pieces that will fall into place over time. The main thing that bus systems are sort of looking at on the horizon is the agency safety plan rule, which basically says that if you're a transit system, transit agency, bus, rail, ferry boats, whatever, you have to have an agency safety plan, which is going to be based in the principles of Subject Safety Management System, SMS, which is what we're going to talk about. So the NPRM for that rule is slated to hit early 2016. The NPRM, that's a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, so I recommend that when that hits, you take a look at it, and that's basically the FTA saying to the industry, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. How do you feel about it? Please give us your comments. It doesn't make a good rule if nobody comments on it. So if you've got problems or you like it, either way, you really want to know about it. And then you can expect a final rule from that in another year or so. So it's a long, slow process. So we can't tell you what's in the NPRM until it comes out. There's a lot of confidentiality in the rulemaking process. But what we can tell you is that the rule is based in the principles of safety management system, and it's also along the continuity line of the system safety regulations that exist for the rail transit industry. So we're going to spend some time today talking about the bus safety program and what it can do beyond just this one rule that's applicable to all transit systems, the bus program itself and some of the other pieces of it that continue to be voluntary. And then we're going to talk about safety management systems as a management concept that will give you some idea of where you can expect the agency safety rules to land when we start to see it next year. So I'm not going to waste any more airtime. although I do enjoy the sound of my own voice, I think you're going to get a lot more benefit from listening to Erik and Ream. So you've got their bios. I'll let them introduce themselves, and you guys can take it from here. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Joe. So my name is Erik Larson. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm contract support to Joe and FTA, and I'm delighted to be the first person on this webinar to give you information about FTA's Bus Safety Program before Ream will take over and dig into the details about SMS. The bus program is a voluntary program designed to provide guidance and technical assistance to transit systems as they build and implement their safety, public safety, and emergency preparedness infrastructure. You can do next slide. So with FTA's new regulatory authorities under MAP 21, we anticipate eventually transitioning to an oversight role. But for today, just like Joe was saying, the program is 100% voluntary. The program was developed with input from industry partners such as APTA, CTAA, and AASHTO, and we share the same objective that many of your agencies do, to improve safety for passengers, employees, and all that share the roadways with transit buses. Since the program was designed to provide guidance and technical assistance to the industry, the initial focus was on small, urban, and rural bus systems, as they tend to have limited resources available to them when compared to larger systems. This is not news to most of you on the line. In a small system, safety manager may also manage training, operations, and maintenance, whereas in a larger system, the agency may have a well-staffed safety department. So our program sought to increase the technical assistance resources available to those small systems. And now we've also branched out to include resources and guidance for large urban bus systems too. Next slide. So the bus program has 4 major components. First is the Safety and Training Resource website, which has been recently reimagined and upgraded. We'll discuss the website in more detail in just a few minutes. Next are our voluntary on-site reviews. Oh, back to the last one. Thank you. So under the voluntary on-site review program, transit agencies and state DOTs can volunteer agencies for a safety review from the bus program. The reviews include evaluations of the transit system in key program areas such as management, operations, vehicles and facilities, personnel, training, public safety, and emergency preparedness. On-site reviews may also include an SMS gap analysis to assist the agency with kickstarting their SMS implementation. Our reviews are very different than audits. There aren't really findings, but we can come up with some best practices, and we always back up whatever we find as a suggestion with technical resources to help you get on your way to close that gap. We provide orientation seminars to state DOTs and their sub-grantees, and this is where we provide guidance and technical assistance on safety concerns that are currently predominant in the industry. So we've provided a seminar to 49 of the 50 states so far. So if you're calling in from Rhode Island, we hope to see you soon. We'll have all 50 done. So then the last one on the slide, the program provides ongoing outreach to the industry as well. This takes the form of presentations at local and National Transit Association conferences, email blasts from our website, and webinars such as this one. So next slide, please. Now, I promised that we would talk more about the Safety and Training Resource website, and this is a site that I'm very excited to share with you. So as you see on the screen, the web address is safety.fta.dot.gov. Here you'll be able to search FTA's resource library for plans, templates, and best practices on a wide variety of topics. The site also hosts FTA's SMS guidance materials, such as the FTA SMS Framework. And once you register for the site, you'll also be able to view and take on-site and e-learning courses, such as SMS Awareness, which is currently available from FTA. You can also get notifications for events that you may be interested in, and you can receive blast emails from FTA on pertinent safety topics. This website is the central hub for FTA's SMS guidance and training, so I encourage all of you to visit the site and get registered. If you have any questions on the bus program, please use the questions feature on the screen, and we'll be happy to answer at the end of the webinar. But for now, I'm going to turn things over to Ream Lazaro, who will discuss Safety Management Systems, or SMS.
Thank you, Erik. Safety management systems is the basis for FTA's new National Public Transportation Safety Program. At the core of the FTA SMS implementation strategy is the Safety Management Systems Framework, which was developed by FTA to provide the public transportation industry with the building blocks of an SMS and the milestones for its implementation. Erik mentioned that that's available on the website, the FTA Transit Safety website, and I would strongly urge everyone who's participating in this to download it and become familiar with it, and as well go through the e-learning course on SMS awareness that's also on the website. For the sake of this presentation, and given that it's sponsored by National RTAP, I'm going to make the assumption that a majority of the folks are stakeholders within either state DOTs, small urban or rural systems. So that's going to be kind of my focus here for the next half hour. But the truth of the matter, I don't think that anything I'm going to say isn't relevant to any size bus transit agency. Next slide, please. So what's FTA want? There's a total agreement that we are a safe industry. Very clearly, I think we've demonstrated that. I've worked in transit 38 years and have always been proud of our safety record. Bad things happen, obviously, but generally we have been a safe industry. So the question then is, how do we become even safer? How do we develop sound and solid safety policies? How do we manage risk? How do we grow a strong safety culture? And FTA has looked outside of the transit industry in its embracing of SMS. I think some of you may be familiar that SMS has been implemented in the aviation industry and a whole other number of other industries, and has been extremely successful in that regard. And one of the beauties of SMS is that it is flexible and really can be engineered based on size and operating characteristics of the transit agency. Slide, please. So what should change look like? Well, the first thing, and I think maybe perhaps the most important thing, that accountability for safety is placed at the top of the transit agency. If we're talking of smaller transit agencies, I suspect that most of the participants in this webinar, which, by the way, Joe, the last time I looked was 170, so we did break the 100 mark, really is already there. In a smaller agency, it's almost impossible for a transit leader not to be directly responsible for safety. Under SMS, that's formalized. SMS is all about communication on safety and about reporting of safety hazards. Very clearly, the people who know best where safety hazards lie are the people who are involved directly in putting out service on the street. That would be bus drivers, operators, whatever term you use, mechanics if you have maintenance in-house, supervisors and dispatchers. And if those folks are talking and their concerns are documented, then SMS has a process to take that information and put us in a more proactive mode in terms of mitigating risk. So change involves monitoring performance, making balanced decisions. I think that's a critical issue. There's always the pressure to put service out on the street, that operational pressure. But with SMS, that pressure, hopefully, if it's an effective SMS, is balanced by concern for safety risk and the need to mitigate that risk while putting out the service. Slide, please. So, questions we need to ask that SMS helps us answer. There are 5 of them. What are our most serious safety concerns? How do we know it? What are we doing about it? Is what we're doing working? And how do we know what we're doing is working? That, in essence, is what SMS will do for us in bus transit. Slide, please. Before I go into the major components and subcomponents of SMS, I want to talk briefly about 2 significant safety-related concepts that directly feed into a safety management system. They are the organizational accident and practical drift. Slide, please. First, I'm going to talk about the organizational accident. I'm going to try to put it in the context of existing reality and what we generally do in our business now and what potentially SMS can guide us to do. Next slide, please. There are two types of accidents. One type of accident is an individual accident. Basically, what that suggests is the behavior of a person. In bus transit, that person is obviously a bus driver. The behavior of a person directly leads to an accident. It could be a person in another vehicle as well, or a pedestrian. But then there are organizational accidents. And conceptually what this is about is to suggest that some accidents go well beyond the behavior of a single individual or a number of individuals. That there are in fact latent organizational issues that basically create potential risk. And if we only deal with individuals and we don't address the underlying organizational issues, we don't bring around change in a positive way from a safety perspective. And look at the transit model. It's pretty clear, and unfortunately, I far too many times as I look back did this very thing. We have an accident or incident. It gets investigated. We determine, was it preventable or non-preventable? If it's non-preventable, we move on. If it's preventable, we discipline the employee and we move on. Unfortunately, far too often, we don't look deeper for root causes organizationally that potentially could have led to the accident, because disciplining an employee doesn't lower risk in and of itself, particularly if there are latent organizational factors that basically cause that risk. An example might be in fixed route bus service. You have an accident where the bus pulling out of the bus stop has a collision with another vehicle. Traditionally, we would look at that accident, determine was the driver, did they use their mirrors, were they practicing good driving, defensive driving skills, and perhaps we would find the accident preventable and discipline. Under SMS, it would argue that you look deeper. For example, it could be the training for the driver in terms of pulling out of bus stops was inadequate. It could be the actual placement of the bus stop itself. So in order to really mitigate risk, that root cause analysis is critical to safety management, and that's what SMS is safety management system. Slide, please. James Reason, who's certainly one of the gurus of SMS within the aviation industry, said, organizational accidents have multiple causes involving many people operating at different levels of their respective companies. Slide. So, a critical tool in the transit risk management process is clearly identifying and analyzing organizational factors, root causes that may contribute to accidents and incidents. SMS demands that as part of its management system for safety. Next slide. Individuals sometimes trigger conditions leading to organizational accidents, but always keep in mind organizational accidents have deeper and broader roots. The discovery of human error should be considered the starting place, not the ending place. That's not to say that every accident has organizational implications, but we don't know it unless we do some form of root cause analysis. Slide, please. Practical drift, another critical SMS concept, and one that if we get our arms around, I think we'll be more effective in implementing safety management systems at a bus transit agency. Slide, please. This is an imperfect system, the practical drift. If you go ahead and animate that, Neil, I'd appreciate it. And just walk us through, and then I'll talk about what you're visually seeing there is the difference that occurs over time between work as imagined, in other words, what we designed, what we engineered, what we trained on, and how stuff is actually done. It's an uncoupling of practice from procedure. There are a lot of reasons for that, and if you animate the rest of the slide, Neil, please. Thank you. So as we look down the right side of this PowerPoint slide, why does drift happen? Well, sometimes it's service delivery pressures. Sometimes the pressure to do something requires us to shortcut certain procedures. Maybe the procedures just, frankly, aren't practical anymore, or shortcuts are more efficient. Sometimes supervision allows practical drift to occur. Sometimes training doesn't take care of its responsibility and adequately conveyed risk. The bottom line is practical drift occurs. It occurs in transit, it occurs in any work environment, and frankly, it occurs in life generally. The danger from a safety perspective within a bus transit agency is that management is thinking a certain thing is happening because that's the procedure, when the reality out on the street where the rubber hits the road is quite different, and thus management is making decisions based on inadequate information. A quick example, in demand response service, and I've done so many site reviews in my career, I can't even come up with a number, but one of the things that I often hear in doing a site review within demand response service in bus transit is that we offer door-to-door service, but under no circumstances do we go through the outer door of a residence. That's what people are trained on, that's what the procedures are, and then you go out and ride the bus, and you see that the driver, because he has compassion or she has compassion for the passenger, carrying bags into the house because they didn't believe the passenger could carry the bags themselves. That is practical drift in action in a demand response agency. Does it happen everywhere? No. Does it happen? I'm sure everybody on this webinar would agree that it does happen. And it's not out of bad motivation, but it does present a heightened level of risk. Slide, please. Go ahead and animate this through. Thank you. Basically, for SMS to work, we got to know what is really going on in our service delivery operations. We've got to know the difference between where we are and where we thought we were, or otherwise the ability to manage safety is deeply impaired. Slide, please. So, what's this mean? In order to identify practical drift, we've got to monitor individual and organizational safety performance to identify if, how, why practical drift has occurred, and to assist in assuring safe operations by living with our feet well planted in reality. Next slide. A quick overview of SMS, and then we'll walk through the components. Slide. What is SMS? Basically, SMS, and the critical words on this slide, I think, is formal. And we've managed safety all along. Safety is not a new concept within the transit industry or for anyone on this webinar. But this is a more formal management process that is akin to other formal management processes that we use, such as financial management, human resource management. You get the idea. It's top-down. It's driven from the executive level, and accountability is driven from the executive level. It involves everyone. It's not saying safety is one person's responsibility. It's an organization-wide process with everyone having a role to play, certainly, particularly in a smaller bus agency where everybody is actively involved in one way or another in service delivery. It's data-driven because it's fed off of data. SMS needs information in order to identify risk and mitigate it. And it assures that risk mitigations are effective by monitoring them, and it includes policies, procedures, and practices for the management of safety risk. SMS is a management system, y'all. That's what it is. Slide, please. The SMS framework has basically 4 major components, and we're going to talk about each of them in a few minutes, through the next few minutes. Safety management policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. Slide, please. Let's first talk about safety management policy, the first major component of an effective SMS. Slide. The safety management policy component has basically 4 subcomponents, and I'm going to walk you through each of those very, very briefly. But what I want to do on this slide is suggest that the safety management policy component of SMS is the management umbrella under which the SMS functions. It establishes a management policy statement, defines roles and responsibilities, it defines external relationships, and clearly involves documentation and record keeping. Slide, please. The first subcomponent of safety management policy is an actual safety management policy statement. It's the charter of the SMS. It's signed by the accountable executive, by the transit leadership. It basically speaks to roles and responsibilities in implementing an SMS. It speaks to commitment to safety and to the application of resources to lower risk, and it speaks to the important role that everyone plays in an employee safety reporting system. FTA will be providing samples of this policy statement. It certainly should not be a heavy lift, and obviously needs to be communicated throughout the organization. Next slide. If you're going to implement a safety management system, then everybody has to know their roles and responsibilities within it. As I said previously, safety is not the sole responsibility of any single person. Clearly, we have people who may be supervising safety functions, who may have some identified role in safety, but they don't do it alone. This requires everyone's involvement. And so under the safety management policy major component, the second subcomponent is defining roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. For the executive leadership, for whoever is directly responsible for safety and or the SMS, for supervisors, dispatchers, frontline employees, would be they bus drivers, or if you have maintenance in-house, mechanics. Simply defining what folks' roles are so they know what to do to carry that out in support of an effective SMS. Slide. Very clearly, in our business, we rely and interface with external entities. 2 critically important external entities are law enforcement and emergency management. The SMS guides in making sure that these external programs and external organizations are communicated with effectively, that we coordinate with them effectively, that we develop procedures and policies to carry out activities related to security events, and thus we'd be talking law enforcement, or community emergencies, thus we'd be talking emergency management, in terms of what we do. If we got a security event on a bus, who do we call? How do we get response? If we're mobilized by emergency management because of a community emergency, let's say to evacuated folks out of a flooding area, for example, that we know about that relationship and what our expectations are. Next slide. If SMS relies on data, then documentation is pretty obviously going to be a critical arena. What we're talking about here is not just the safety management policy statements, accountabilities, responsibilities, but all process and procedures that are critical to an effective SMS are documented. They're not just in people's minds. For a smaller transit agency, that documentation is not a heavy lift. particularly with the guidance that FTA will be providing on SMS implementation. So that ends the first major component, safety management policy, and I would suspect that nothing that I've suggested would be extraordinarily difficult for a smaller transit agency to put into place and be effective in carrying it out in support of an SMS. Slide, please. The heart of an SMS is safety risk management. Safety risk management is where the rubber hits the road from an SMS. This is where the critical decision-making processes take place. Slide. The major component of safety risk management is vital. I actually can't overestimate that word or overemphasize that word, is absolutely vital to the success of an SMS. Before an SMS can be improved or built or made to work, we have to have a process to identify safety hazards in our operation and to put into place mitigations to manage safety risk. And this safety risk management process isn't a one-time shot. It's an ongoing shot. It's something that's continuous. Are we doing a lot of this already? Of course we are. Are we doing it effectively? I would certainly assume so. Could we do it better? I would equally assume so. And I think that's where SMS really comes into play in terms of formalizing often some things that are done perhaps more informally at a transit agency. Slide. The first subcomponent of safety risk management is hazard identification and analysis. We are reactive when we respond to an accident or incident that takes place. That's perfectly appropriate, critically important. Reference what we talked about in terms of the organizational accident, examining the accident or incident in a reactive way to try to mitigate the potentiality of that accident incident occurring again in the future by taking some kind of action, assuming there are organizational root causes for the accident. But that is reactive. The other side of that coin, and the side of the coin that SMS builds on, is being proactive, identifying hazards and analyzing those hazards prior to an accident, an incident happening, and attempting to mitigate them so that the accident and incident doesn't happen. So how do we get that information? Through employees, through field reviews for being in the system, for looking at data, through a whole wide range of possibilities. Are we identifying and documenting and analyzing hazards? And please hear the fact that I said documenting, because although we often do this, we often don't document it as well as we could, so it's not available for trending. And that's what we're looking for. If you don't have a lot of accidents or incidents, then at least we want to have strong documentation of the hazards that potentially are out there. Slide. Once we've identified the hazards and analyzed them, we're now going to evaluate the potential consequences of identified hazards. The potential consequences of identified hazards. And the way we do that is we use our subject matter expertise and we say, how likely is a certain consequence how likely to occur is a certain consequence based on this hazard, and how severe would that consequence be if it occurred? Now, why do we want to do that? Well, because this is a safety management system, and we have limited, God knows, limited resources available to apply to our risk. We want a way to prioritize our risk in a formal way, and that's what SMS does by this process of hazard identification, analysis, evaluation, and prioritization. Once we've done that, then the leadership of the organization has what are their top priority risks in terms of the probability and the impact of consequences of hazards, and they're able to manage those limited resources by applying them in the right place in a formal and well thought out process. Slide. Safety assurance. If safety risk management is the heart of SMS, then safety assurance is the soul of SMS. This is where we move forward. This is, if you will, the dog that watches the door. This is how we know what we're doing is working, and how we know, from a practical drift standpoint, what is actually happening as we deliver service. Slide. 3 subcomponents of safety assurance: safety performance monitoring, measurement, management of change, and continuous improvement of the SMS. Basically, within safety assurance is where our performance data is collected and analyzed. This is safety assurance and safety risk management interact in a cyclical way, so that each basically feeds the other, and together they provide the basis of a safety management system in a bus transit agency. How do we monitor performance? Well, we look at data. We get out in the field. We get on buses. We go in the maintenance shop if we're doing maintenance in-house. We're looking at what happened. And we set safety objectives and targets so that we can move forward in our safety mission, and it's only through safety assurance that we can measure how well we're doing. Next slide. Safety performance monitoring and measurement. That is what it is. It's basically monitoring how we're delivering service, monitoring whether we're meeting our safety objectives, measuring how well we're doing against those objectives, and really keeping our finger on the pulse of how well we're doing from a safety management standpoint, and how well our risk mitigations are being carried out and how effective they are. It's also an opportunity to identify new hazards and feed them into the safety risk management process. Next. I think, in all my years in transit, I could say with absolute assurance that any time I've been involved either working inside or as a consultant with transit agencies that have changed something about how they do business, whether it's, growing in terms of service delivery, whether it's new technology, whatever it might be, new operational characteristics, that inevitably there is a heightened level of safety risk involved with change. Under SMS, the model is not, as far too often actually happens, is to implement the change and then see if something bad happens and then react to it. The model is before change is implemented, some level, something related to operational change is implemented. We evaluate that change to see if it's going to introduce new hazards, and if the answer is yes, it potentially could, we put it through the safety risk management process to create mitigations to lower the risk of those hazards prior to the implementation of change. It's all about the cart and the horse here, and not getting the cart ahead of the horse. Not implementing a change and then finding out what risk is involved, find out what risk is involved on the front end, mitigate if necessary, then implement the change. Slide, please. Continuous improvement subcomponent of SMS. Basically what we're saying here is it's always a work in process. You're always going to try to make it work better. It's going to take a while to implement. Year, 2 years to implement an effective SMS, and then you're going to constantly want to improve it. It's sort of the concept of you never reach the mountaintop, you only experience the climb. So our commitment to SMS is not only to implement it, but to continuously improve it. Slide, please. The fourth major component of SMS is safety promotion. Basically, the first component, safety management policy, is the management umbrella under which the SMS functions. The heart and soul, safety risk management and safety assurance, are the work of the SMS. The platform that the SMS functions on is safety promotion. Slide. This is stuff we're already doing, folks. There's no rocket science involved here. It's about safety communication, and it's about building competencies and training folks. Slide. Safety communication. Safety meetings. Maybe if you're big enough, you have safety committees. One-on-one safety. Employee safety reporting. Communicating stuff in writing or electronically. Putting stuff on driver brake area bulletin boards or walls. All of that is safety communication. And the reality is the SMS is so dependent on that communication being effective, that people are encouraged and motivated to communicate, that they're not afraid to communicate, not concerned for reprisal if they communicate. Because without that, since this is a management system, management is living in a vacuum of information. And employees are living in a vacuum of information. Slide. We train. That's certainly, a major responsibility of any transit agency. And most of that training is skill training, defensive driving skills, passenger assistance skills, emergency response skills, maintenance, mechanic skills if you're doing maintenance in-house, dispatching skills. SMS doesn't take away any of that training responsibility. But what it does say is that there's a couple other pieces of training that we need to be doing. And one of those pieces is what are everybody's roles and responsibilities within the SMS. I mean, that only has to happen once, and then after that it can be fed into new hire training as people are brought on board. But for people to carry it out, they have to know what they're supposed to do. We got to train folks on how do they report their safety concerns, employee safety reporting. And also on, we train folks on doing analysis, root cause analysis of accidents and incidents, how to develop mitigations. And much of that would not be formal, it would be more hands-on kinds of training. And the reality is that SMS is dependent on communication and training. I don't think the burden is huge, but it certainly is a training responsibility. And also, if we create new risk mitigations, if you stop and think about it, there might be some skills that will be required by employees to put those mitigations into place. That would require training. Slide. Employee safety reporting. Very briefly, because I've talked, I think, as much as I need to about it. Slide. SMS doesn't work without data. Who knows better what's going on the ground than employees delivering the service? So when they report effectively, we find unanticipated hazards or deficiencies. We find whether or not our mitigations are actually working or not. So we're really reliant on frontline employees to be major players and empowered in this process. Slide. Remember, as I'm sure you know, that people are not natural messengers, so we've got to train them how to report, and inevitably there'll be some reporting that has nothing to do with safety issues. That just goes with the game. We got to make it easy to report. When do people report their safety concerns? When they're getting ready to leave work. If we make it difficult, it's far too often likely that they're not going to bother reporting because they want to get out of there and go somewhere else. We got to give them feedback. If they take the time to report, we got to give them feedback in order to motivate them to continue to report and their peers to report as well. We got to guarantee that the information when people report it is used for what it was, and that's to identify safety hazards, not to beat somebody up about it. And we got to make sure that folks realize that when they report something, that we're going to try to solve it. And if we can't solve it right away, we're going to be honest about that and present feedback to them. Slide. Okay, in the wrap-up piece, let's talk for a second about SMS at small bus agencies. SMS implementation by a transit agency is, contrary to some perceptions at least, a relatively inexpensive undertaking because a significant amount of the processes and activities underlying SMS are already in place. Smaller transit agencies already have somebody who's doing some safety and training stuff, already has safety plans, policies, procedures. They have some level of documentation, perhaps not as much as one would like. And so SMS builds on this existing safety infrastructure with an increasing emphasis on proactive safety management, not just reactive after the accident or incident safety management, but proactive safety management as well. Slide, please. There's a lot of advantages, for small bus agencies. I hear this concern because I'm all over the country representing the FTA Bus Program and talking about safety and talking about SMS, that, it's going to be overburdened for a small agency. Will there be challenges? Of course. I'm not being naive about that. But let me lay out some of the reasons to not be too concerned. These are the things that small bus agencies generally already have in place. High levels of communication. Folks are already talking to each other. There's not a lot of we versus they stuff going on. There's some level of trust. The decision-making process is pretty simple because there aren't that many organizational levels. Folks understand each other's jobs. Thus, the subject matter expertise required to analyze hazards and put mitigations in place are generally across the board because, as we all know, managers sometimes drive, dispatchers sometimes drive. The smaller the agency, the more cross-functional folks are in terms of understanding everybody's job. So changes can be made quickly. Employee concern for passenger well-being, I think that's huge. In smaller agencies, that relationship between bus drivers and passengers can get pretty intense, as we all know. Certainly, the driver is going to be concerned about the safety and well-being of their passengers. And that concern is a motivator to empower them to participate in identifying safety hazards and trying to mitigate them to keep their folks safe. Smaller bus agencies generally have limited accidents and incidents. Safety hazards, they're there, but they aren't overwhelming often. So we don't have a lot of accident and incident data to track, thank God, but what we do have is the ability to be proactive and identify safety hazards and evaluate them and prioritize them and mitigate them. The implementation plan, which FTA will provide guidance and templates on, among other things, is going to be extremely scaled down for a small agency compared to a large urban multimodal transit system. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Next slide. There are some challenges, obviously. Initial implementation will take some time and resources. More attention is going to have to be put on formal and enhanced documentation of hazards and that analysis process. The root cause analysis of organizational accidents, or of accidents and incidents, determine if there are organizational root causes, is going to require attention. We'll have to get out into the system, monitor performance, monitor pre-trips, monitor whatever needs to be monitored. There'll be initially some added training needs, but that will basically go away after the initial setup. And what is often happening informally would need to be formalized, and that's employee safety reporting. With that, I'm going to wrap it up by saying this. Implementing SMS doesn't really require you to add new technology, to hire new folks, to create new structures. You basically are going to refocus your existing processes and activities, redeploy existing resources to achieve the specific objective of a management system, and that is the acquisition and analysis of data that will support transit agency leadership in making decisions about allocating limited resources to manage safety during service delivery operations. Thank you all very much, and I will turn it back to Neil, Erik, and Joe.
Thank you, Ream. And I think, Erik, we're going to take some questions at this time.
Yes, we are. So if you have any questions that you haven't had a chance to answer just yet, please go ahead and send those in to us. We've still got plenty of time left, but we can try to answer as many questions as possible. So we've got a few that are here. So first up, it seems like the SMS documentation and records section under safety management policy is just repeating the other sections. Can you give a specific example of what should go in this section? When we talk about documentation within the SMS documentation and records part of safety management policy, we're looking more at documenting the processes that will help you to sustain that SMS, because the SMS can't be something that's short term. You know, oh, this is just the flavor of the month. We're going to do this for 6 months, and then we're going to get distracted by something else, and we're never going to see it again. That's not the direction that the industry is going. So we need to make sure that we document those processes along with anything that we have done to support the implementation of the SMS. So if you put in new programs, such as an employee reporting system, you know, the initial documentation or the initial steps that you do in order to put that program in place, this would be a place for that, along with your safety management policy statement. So we have a second question. What is the difference between safety and security, or does SMS include security? And I'll pass this to Ream, because this is one of his favorite questions.
Thank you, Erik. Very clearly, security is a safety concern within a transit agency. And although, you know, the word safety implies accidents and incidents, it very clearly within the SMS also implies that security events within the transit infrastructure have to be responded to. That response, if you remember when I was talking about the integration of the SMS with external entities like law enforcement, is going to be defined by your relationship with law enforcement to a great degree. And it's going to be defined as well by your procedures and your training. You know, just for example, one of the issues that often causes security events on a transit vehicle is a fare dispute. So SMS would argue that if that's a hazard, which the consequences of a hazard could be an assault, then we really would want to train folks on how to avoid and de-escalate potential fare disputes. So there is, in fact, a significant security relationship within a safety management system. Erik?
All right, next up. Where does the reactive portion, i.e. the actual accident investigation and root cause analysis, reside in the SMS framework? I'm going to take a stab at answering this both from a literal and a figurative side, just to make sure I cover both areas here. If you're actually talking about where is it within the SMS framework document, then you're not going to find it. You know, it shows up, the word reactive shows up once within the document. And the reason you're not going to see it is there is an implication that all of your existing safety activities, you know, the things that you're doing right now to manage safety are still going to continue. You know, you're still going to be investigating accidents and incidents and complaints and taking care of the things that you need to take care of to make sure that the service on the street is as safe for your passengers and your employees as you can make it. Now, these reactive activities will actually come into play within, you know, like the big picture SMS framework, because that information that you're getting from those investigations could tie into any number of the components that Ream talked about. You know, it could come into your safety risk management process where it'll help you identify a new risk, or it may help you to analyze it, you know, because the number of complaints that you've gotten has helped you to determine, you know, what's the probability this could actually happen. They could also support your safety assurance activities. Part of assurance is checking on your mitigation to make sure that when you put a change in place, that it's having the intended effect. And so you can get information from these reactive activities if your changes have been successful or not. I want to be careful about saying that safety assurance is supported by reactive activities, because it is, but it can't only be reactive activities. a huge transition for the industry is going to be performance indicators and targets that are based on proactive measures instead of the reactive. So reactive will still support, but it will need to be supported by your proactive activities as well.
If I can interrupt you, or not interrupt you, Erik, but pile on at the end of that. When you're doing hazard identification and analysis, you can do two different types of analysis. You can do inductive or deductive analysis. Inductive analysis is where you're inducing a problem, right? You're creating a problem, imaginary problem, not a real problem. You're not actually going to crash a bus, but you're going to say, if we did this, what would happen? If this switch were to fail, what would happen? Oh, if the switch failed, the lights would go off. What if the lights went off? Oh, somebody would crash into you. Okay, so that's part of your hazard identification and process, right? You're doing inductive analysis, and you're going to do that through your organization. Hey, what happened? What would happen if this happened? What would happen if that happened? To identify hazards. Deductive analysis is the exact opposite, right? You're deducing what happened because the accident already occurred, right? So now you're doing the why did it occur. So we had an accident. Somebody crashed into us. Well, why? Because the lights were out. They couldn't see us. Well, why were the lights out? Because the switch failed, right? So you're basically just, it's the same problem, just approached from different ends. So that's a really important part of your hazard identification and process where you're identifying hazards. When you have an accident, you have to figure out why that accident occurred and find out what the hazard was. What is this hazard that we don't know about that exists that we need to find and get rid of? That's your deductive hazard analysis, whereas your inductive hazard analysis is the stuff that you're doing before the accident happens.
Great, Joe. Thank you very much. All right, so our next question. I'm guessing there will be links to documents for the SMS structure and planning. And I'm really glad that this question came up because this was part of bringing up, right up in the front of everything, this new website that FTA has brought up, the Safety Training and Resource website at safety.fta.dot.gov. FTA is in the process of developing just a plethora of guidance materials to help the industry understand what the expectations are, and then to give them guides and templates as well so that everybody's on the same page and not starting from scratch. So as these materials are developed, they're going to be posted on the website and be available to the industry. And if you're registered, we can also start sending out blast emails, so you'll even be notified. You won't have to check the website every single day. We can send those directly to your email. So that was a great question. So next, what was the FTA's estimated time frame for implementation? And this can be a more complicated question depending on how you look at it, because there's so much variability within our industry. Because you can go everywhere from small bus up to a large rail system, or look at the variability even between bus systems. Because you could have in New York City MTA is going to have some very different characteristics than a rural South Dakota paratransit system. So overall, FTA is thinking, and this is based upon models that we have seen in other blanking on one word, in other places that have implemented SMS. It could be industry. How can I forget industry? Anyway, we could be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Now, an important thing to bring up here is that the ones that take the longest are likely to be the larger agencies because it's more complicated to get the processes in place. It's more difficult to, say, set up an employee reporting system because they don't have a culture of trust. So some of the aspects of this implementation, as Ream brought up at the end of his presentation, are already in place at small bus systems, small rural bus systems. They may not be documented as much as they would need to be to make sure that those processes, sustain throughout time, but they are in place. So I would, and I know that Ream feels strongly about this too. We don't really think it's a huge lift for the small agencies.
No, and Erik, sorry.
Go ahead, Ray. No, you go ahead.
Just quickly. my thought is that SMS is not going to be that heavy of lift, and my advice would be to my friends in the industry that go ahead and start moving forward, and don't really worry about when FTA says they're going to require you to do it. This is something that really makes sense from a safety management standpoint. And if you begin to make progress when that time comes, when FTA says thou shalt, you'll already be in a position to address that requirement with relative ease. It just makes sense. Why does it make sense in the end? Because all of us who care about safety in transit, which is clearly everybody in on this webinar, want to be able to look in the mirror in the morning when we brush our teeth and say, I've done my best to keep my employees and passengers safe. And SMS is just one more building block in that process.
Yeah, SMS is a really great way to make your safety management more efficient, and that's always a good thing. And I also what I was going to say is, which is just kind of a tail end, your safety management process only needs to be as complex as your organization is. So if you are running the Chicago Transit Authority, that's a very complex organization with a lot of very complex management processes. If you're running Powell County Transit in Montana, you've got literally, you just doubled your fleet from 1 van to 2. You have a much less complex system with much less complex management processes.
All right, I want to check with Jerry and make sure we've got time for a few more questions.
Absolutely. If you guys are comfortable fielding a couple more questions, you're welcome to do so. I would like to mention, though, we will be posting the recording and associated materials on National RTAP's website. It's nationalrtap.org under the Webinars tab, so look for those within the next week.
Okay. So our next question, what is the timeline for completion and submission of the SMS plan or document, and who monitors compliance? And this question really ties into what Joe was talking about early on when he mentioned the agency safety plan. Because the rule for SMS implementation is going to be within that actual rule. And when it gets posted, you will have an opportunity to comment and give feedback. So that we'll have more information about what that timeline might be, what is actually reasonable, and what makes the most sense for who's monitoring that compliance.
Yeah, the rulemaking process is long and arduous, and I have to admit I'm not a rule maker myself. I'm not on that team, and I don't know all the ins and outs. I only know that it takes a long time. So the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, is slated to hit in the spring, or maybe before the spring, early 2016. And that will be there for the industry to read and comment on. And then we go back and digest comments, and then it has to go through all sorts of review processes. The government doesn't post anything without making sure it meets all kinds of other requirements, and there's a lot of review that happens. So it's a long, slow process that you can expect to take. The whole thing takes years. So if we get the NPRM out early in 2016, you can expect to see a final rule a year later. And then that's the agency safety plan rule. And as far as what the requirements of the agency safety plan rule are, I really don't know. I can't say. If I did know, I couldn't say. You have to wait. You have to wait for the NPRM. That's just the law. And I can tell you that for rail transit systems that are part of the SSO program, the SSO rule will have requirements that will, by meeting their SSO requirements, they will meet the agency safety plan rule. And they're doing a lot of work with their state governments to do that through the SSO program. So there's been a lot of talk about what is the state's role in the bus program. And there hasn't been a lot of good answers to that. I'm hoping that we'll get a lot of good comments on the NPRM about what the state's role is in the agency safety plan rule. I know that the law, MAP 21, that authorizes all of this rulemaking, MAP 21, the law from 2012, that authorizes all of these regulations, basically says that states are allowed to provide assistance for the bus systems in their state 5311 state, systems, so that you don't have to provide 15 or 30 or 100 different agency safety plans, but rather there can be sort of a template or guidance to make things a little bit easier. But I do want to emphasize that every agency should make their own specific agency safety plan. You know what your own hazards are. You've got that one stop sign that everybody runs, and you know it's there, and that should be on your hazard analysis. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Joe. So I think we have one last question. So this question is, as we do the risk analysis and look for answers to help mitigate risk, there's generally funding available to the larger transit agencies. It would be great if there were opportunities for the smaller transits to accomplish their goals. And we can't agree with you more. I know the entire bus program is rooted very, very strongly in small bus systems, whether small urban or rural. This is kind of where we call home. So I can assure you that, like, as we go through the processes of seeing what implementation will look like and how technical assistance is being developed and what guidance is going to come out, there'll be more information that will be tailored, to what you're going to be looking at. You won't have to look at what a big city is doing and try to figure out how that works for your agency. But there's also going to be opportunities to have additional training opportunities. I mean, there's so many partners with this bus program that are very enthusiastic about getting the message out and helping transit agencies as much as they can. And a great example of this is what we're doing right here today, with National RTAP reaching out to us to do this webinar. So between RTAP, between CTAA, I can imagine that there's going to be opportunities available to assist the transit agencies to be able to do this SMS implementation.
Okay, this is Neil from National RTAP staff. We'd like to thank everyone who attended this webinar and participated. And I'd like to thank Erik and Ream. Gave some great information. And also thanks to Joe at FTA. Thank you very much. It's been a very successful webinar.
Thank you, Neil.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I thank all of you for taking your time, and thank you all as well for what you do to improve the quality of life of people in your community. It's invaluable.
You're welcome. Appreciate that. Okay, well, I think this concludes the RTAP webinar, 1-1 webinar on bus safety and SMS for small agencies. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
You guys still there?
Yeah, you're still live, Neil.
I stopped it. How did I do?
Here.